Looks like we're live.
Yeah. Welcome to Benjamin Live with Prince of Queens. This is Prince of Queens.
Hi. Benjamin's
Yeah.
first live stream on his channel, or
Yeah.
second, technically, because he just did one.
Well, the other one was a Skype chat.
Well, no, I meant the one that you literally just did 5 minutes ago.
Okay, well, technically, this is the third because I did a 12-second snowy clip before that. So,
Yeah. I'm gonna pull up the I wanna look at so yeah. This was supposed to be on my channel. I'm going to be sort of doing the little introduction because this was supposed to be on my channel because I saw Benjamin making videos. When did you start making videos?
like videos that people watched.
Yeah, I guess it was the ones that were when you started exposing Evergreen. Um,
Yeah.
when did you start doing that?
I did my first Evergreen video on June 11th.
Okay, so I saw it not long after that. Like I think I saw
Mhm.
saw your videos within probably 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because that was a subject that interested me, not simply because I'm an anti-SJW type. But
Is that how
who,
you identify?
no, I
The
was about to
cocktail
say
party?
who hates labels, who like what's my label? I would say like I was trying to say centrist for a while, but then I realized that even like, and then I'm like nonpartisan, and then that annoyed me because I was like, I currently say nonpartisan on Twitter for my channel, but I
Right.
realized that I hate defining as non anything because it's like
Mhm.
why that doesn't even really make sense. Like, why do you
Yeah.
define yourself as something that you're? But I'm also but I'm very politically amorphous, and like I can't even take the political test because I feel like the multiple choice, the political compass test.
Yeah.
I feel like the multiple choice questions are confining, and I don't want to pick all. I'm like, nope, none of the above, and so like I get very annoyed. So, but so being someone that drastically criticized SJWs for, I've been criticizing them since the 90s, really, but I come from a background of that being mixed in with them and
Mm.
being a homosexual and everything. Um, I was very interested in the current year, or the past couple of years, really
Yeah.
started happening in 2015, that colleges started getting really, really crazy. And Evergreen, of course, being the craziest of them all. Like that was like I don't think it's going to get worse than Evergreen. I really, really hope it doesn't.
I think Evergreen's leading the way. It's defining the bell curve. So I think that what's happening at Evergreen, like last year, is happening everywhere now. And I mean 2 years ago. And I think it's going to keep on going on like that. I think Evergreen's going to be the avant-garde of this movement. That's my
huh.
hypothesis.
It could be. It's hard to say though, because I mean, it happened first at Yale,
Yeah.
like, and then it happened at Mizzou, and it's happened at other colleges too, but just not as publicized and not as.
Well, okay, it happened among the students. The particular case of Evergreen is that it happened among the faculty first, and it so happens that
Mm,
faculty, by their very nature, are less they're less of a train wreck until
mhm,
things get completely magnified beyond belief. So I think that Evergreen, the inclusivity of this mindset and how far it's entrenched into the administration, the faculty, and the students is
mhm,
kind of leading the way of what happens when you start to design a faculty and then design an administration around this ideology that young people, for a number of reasons, are attracted to.
mhm. Yeah, so um just to back it up, why I was interested in your channel is that, like I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, in the city of Seattle, and I went to high school. Wait, have you spent time in Seattle much?
It's like Portland, but there's more hills and cement.
Okay, so you haven't really like actually lived there though.
No, no, I visit periodically.
Okay, so I went to an alternative high school that if you had lived in Seattle for any amount of time, you would have probably met somebody that went to that alternative high school because it's one of those places where like everybody who ever went there is very memorable. It's like, oh, I know this one girl. Yeah, she was crazy. She went to that's fucking school, and everybody who ever went there like talks about it. Like they're like, I went to
Hmm.
the coolest high school ever, and it's kind of I would say Evergreen is actually I'm pretty sure Evergreen is the most likely college that students from my high school go to. And I ended up going to Eugene Lang College. That's part of the New School University in Manhattan, which is kind of like a more expensive version of Evergreen. I would it's say in a certain way that's a little bit less like I don't know. I don't know enough about Evergreen to really make the comparison, but it would be like
Okay,
um
yeah,
it would kind of be like Manhattan trying to be a, a super progressive liberal arts college, but there's some different tenets about it. Like I don't want to get too into it because it's also changed a lot. Like I went there from 2002 through 2004, and it's changed a lot by now. But it was a liberal arts college, and I majored in creative writing, and I noticed that you majored in
oh,
creative writing. So yeah, but we both did so at places that were particularly, they had a very high emphasis on social sciences and these kind of Marxist people were very much okay. So I don't know if there's all that much of a heavy emphasis on social science at Evergreen, but the whole like massive amount of Marxist students and maybe even faculty that existed at my university as well
yeah.
back then. And I also come from the Pacific Northwest, and I know a lot of people who've gone to Evergreen. So I just figured we had a lot in common. And that was why I wanted to chat with you initially. And that was the introduction that I wanted to say.
Um, Yeah, the I don't know if yeah, Evergreen does definitely does have social sciences, but I don't know what the definition of science is right now and what the definition of social is right now. But within the larger kind of rubric of the humanities, there seems to be an encroachment, and it's not everywhere. Actually, I really do think that it's a very small amount of um, professors that are kind of leading the charge with this stuff. And then there's a huge amount of professors that are quietly not on board or are passively are on board for the whole thing. A couple years ago, actually, when did Trump get elected? Was that just a year ago?
Almost
Seems
exactly
like
a year ago.
it seems much longer. So almost exactly a year ago, there was this there was this event called the Equity and Inclusion Report Back. It's the infamous canoe meeting, right? And I was there. I was in the room. I was on camera, and I'm like filming this stuff. And the room is full of teachers, and they're going on about how everybody needs to be on board with this equity thing, and they're using all these words, and I'm waiting for somebody to actually define their terms, because one of the things that like I learned pretty quickly in college, and that I learned how to teach people in college, because that's another reason I went to Evergreen, is like to learn how to teach, not just to learn how to learn, but to learn how to teach, is that no matter what argument you do, the first thing you do is you define your terms, so we all know what we're working with, and so that people can clearly see your argument and either adopt or reject it. But if you don't define your terms,
Mhm.
everything's basically hidden. And so there was just people talking, and it reminded me of like the attitude was like a church service, but the church service wasn't just because I enjoy church services. If they're oriented in the proper way, they're good and they're edifying. But there can be these church services that aren't oriented in the right way. They have all the trappings of like a church, service where there's like these invocations and there's these songs and there's a lot of testimony, personal testimony, and then the preacher gets up, but if all those little pieces aren't like pointing in the right direction, then it kind of feels off and feels weird. And I'm watching this thing unfold, and I can't believe, because then somebody gets up there, they start talking about whiteness and how whiteness is evil. We need to defeat whiteness, and I'm looking around at like 90% white people,
Yeah.
and there's just like this somber, like, I don't know if I should talk, or yeah, oh yeah, totally, white people suck, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was just the feeling of the room was really, really weird. And but I didn't know if that means that everybody in that room, that sampling of the college, was necessarily on board with this stuff. It so happened that only
And this was
Brett
exactly a year ago.
Weinstein. Yeah, it was a week after Trump got elected. So everybody was in shock. Everybody's in panic mode. Everybody's like on
Uh-huh.
the verge of tears. Not everybody, but a lot. Like
Eh,
the general feeling
How long
is
had
one
you
of
been at the
panic.
college?
At that point, I was embarking on my fourth year.
Okay, so you didn't know that there was this cult quietly taking over Evergreen entirely, or
No, I knew that it was I could, when I first got there, like my first class, like I kind of felt it. Like I remember back in the 90s when I should have gone to college and I didn't go to college, like that there was this feminism going on. I think it was like the first wave of the third wave of feminism, like where
yeah,
there's like a lot of radical feminism going on. And I remember getting into these arguments with these feminists where like there's no way that you can win. There's no way that you could actually have a conversation.
you
It's
mean
like
back in the 90s?
back in the 90s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And when I got to Evergreen, I saw a lot of the same things. I'm like, wow, feminism has just been like on pause here for 20 years. So like,
Yeah.
okay, here we are. But then, like with these huge banners when you go into the library, like nobody wins under patriarchy. You're like, well, what does that mean? I guess I'm a man, and like young women like getting mad at me for no reason. You're like, well, I guess I'm your daddy because you're at college now or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but and that was just like seeing like, yeah, okay, at the age of 19 and 20 and 21, 22, 23, 24, young people are radical. Young people, like, they glom onto these ideas that seem to promise that they're going to make the world better, and they really, really believe in these ideas, and they're not really refined in their communication techniques, right? So
Yeah.
I kind of excuse that.
And they're all
But
mad at something. They think the world is unfair.
yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of anger. I mean, I had a lot of anger back
Yeah,
then,
exactly. That's why I say that I did too. And I'm a little bit older now, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where my anger is now. Well, my anger is directed at people that happen to be my age. But yeah, I have more disappointment than anger. But the thing is that I saw this behavior manifesting, and then I'm like, well, okay, people are just young, and that's just how they act when they're in college, like that.
mhm.
I understand that. I can excuse that, whatever. But I saw that the rhetoric was just amping up, and going to these diversity meetings, going to these different, training sessions, and like being on camera, like filming these things. It was just like that the teachers and the administration and the whole front of the thing was getting more and more into this, like, white people are bad, like literally, like just openly saying Western culture is overrated and we need to get over it. I'm like, okay, get over it, but build something new. Like you were saying, like it's one thing to be like, oh, I don't identify as Western culture. It's another thing to say I identify as something. But
Mhm.
like I just see this negativity, and then I saw it mirrored and reflected in this feedback loop going back between like the adults and then the young people,
Mhm.
just getting more and more rapid, more and more rapid. And not everybody there was like that, but like the official events and trainings and stuff were causing that reverberation to happen.
Mhm.
So
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. I was definitely going to bring up the notion that I don't. Okay, so I listened to your interview with Karen as I was playing video games, and so there was
what
probably
what video game?
I was probably playing either Overwatch or For Honor.
Okay, fair enough.
So yeah, I those are things that, like, I mean, I like to play Overwatch with a headset on so I can talk to my teammates, but I can play it without it and listen to long form interviews. And if something stands out, I will obviously, pay more attention and go back and listen to it or something. But that's sort of what I did, because it was like, okay, this is a long interview, and like, I know I've listened to Karen's videos for a very, very long time, and I kind of know largely the type of thing that she talks about, and I've listened to your videos, but I still want to hear you guys. And so yeah, I was listening to video games. I don't know if I remember you guys talking about this or not. If you were talking about, if you talked about the origins of third wave feminism in Olympia,
Mm.
and did you guys talk about that?
No, I'd love to
Okay.
hear that.
Well, I mean, do you know much about that?
Okay, the origins of third wave feminism, specifically in Olympia.
Well, yeah, because it's actually, Olympia is cited as one of the main cultural epicenters or cesspools of um, third wave feminism. Uh, it had to do with the whole riot girl scene, which was sort of
Oh.
the young person's cultural hipster leg of third wave feminism. Because, I mean, like ultimately third wave feminism was probably mostly an academic movement. It mostly, what people sort of mark as third wave feminism is when gender studies departments became a thing, like when they started existing in universities and becoming substantiated. Because there were hardcore feminists that were around. I mean, okay, I don't want to like state this too wrong, but I
Okay.
think I don't know when the first gender studies department was founded. Like, it could have been in the 70s, but it was around the late 80s when it started becoming more of a cohesive thing, and that's when people call it third wave feminism. And I think it had to do with the um, sort of foundation of gender studies departments really existing. But ultimately, I don't think it had a whole lot of cultural traction outside of academia. And it was these very fringe academics, like these feminist academics, that I don't think anybody at their universities really took them seriously. And there were people like Christina Hoff Sommers who considered
Mm.
themselves feminists, who were, she had a tenure in philosophy, and she was a reputable scholar. And they asked her to teach a feminism course, and she looked through all of the material, and she was like, this isn't this isn't something that I will teach, because it's one-sided. They wanted her to teach a philosophy of feminism course, and she looked
Okay.
at it and she was like, but this isn't proper philosophy. Proper philosophy teaches both sides of the argument and other perspectives. And so you're not going to sit here and like bash this potentiality of this supposed patriarchy without saying, well, what would the other side of that be? What would it, maybe, are we offering a matriarchy as a solution, and what would the downfalls of that be? And that would be, more well-rounded philosophy texts. But she did not see that. And when she spoke out about that, and she wrote a paper about how there was this, very lopsided feminist curriculum, then she was attacked by all these gender studies people. And that was in the late 80s or the early 90s when that happened. But very few people knew about that in outside of academia. The only thing that really seemed to catch on was the whole riot girl movement, which was deeply associated. It was entrenched with the grunge scene,
Okay.
and the person who they really say was the sort of the I don't know, the hero of it, the darling, if you were actually a riot girl and if you're actually a feminist, was Kathleen Hanna of the band Bikini Kill and Le Tigre. But most people haven't actually heard of her. More famously would probably be like Courtney Love and and Kurt
Yeah.
Cobain. Kurt Cobain was actually good friends with Kathleen Hanna, and they all went to Evergreen in the late 80s. when the grunge scene was really just kind of forming. And that was sort of like the young person's like hipster wing of feminism. And that was all at Evergreen. And Courtney Love, one of her songs from Hole, from her band Hole, she, it's like, I don't remember the whole lyrics, but she goes, "When I went to school in Olympia," and and she talks. The song is about how everybody acted the same. Like she thought she was going to go there and everybody was going to be really cool, but then it turned out that everybody in Olympia all acts the same as each other, and it's another conformist place. Is the
Okay.
point of the song, and that was written in the early '90s. Was when she wrote that song. So. I think it's really interesting to think about this notion that it was kind of an intellectual hotbed of this sort of feminist theory type stuff at the time, and now there's this legacy of that,
Okay.
and kids move there for that, but even at the time it was this conformist thing apparently. And so that's just
Yeah.
that's why when you talked about how you're like, whoa, this 20 years of it was put on hold and stayed in Olympia. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing.
Well, the thing is that I mean, can it sustain itself if it doesn't put itself on hold? I mean, I don't know what you mean by third wave feminism. I just use the term because I've heard that. But can you like describe like the core concept of that? Does it have a core concept?
Well, okay, so I could give you my version of this, and one of the things that this is one of the things I like to think I have a pretty good assessment of. Um, Third wave feminism was okay. So second wave feminism was sort of the civil rights movement feminism, and it kind of was just about tangible. It largely was famous for women's liberation and
Mhm.
actually, things being substantiated in law, like things where there were legal barriers, where women had curfews at universities and women couldn't work certain positions, or it was at least completely acceptable to not accept female applicants to certain positions, and then they had to like change that and blah blah blah. And though even in the second wave there was awful crazy feminists that had all these complicated theories that were that are actually honestly no different than the feminists of today. Like it really doesn't change that much, like what they
Yeah.
actually, like the true believers actually believe. But what people sort of say was different about third wave feminism was that after the legal barriers were crossed, when they speak fondly of third wave feminism, they say that third wave feminism was trying to change culture and trying to end sexual violence and end misogyny and end like try to change our culture to be less sexist. And that's sort of like what people will say where third wave feminism picked up where second wave feminism left off. Um, and that third wave feminism was also when intersectionality was introduced. That's when it was coined, though
Okay.
there were intersectionality theory at least, but it was actually there were intersectional feminists during the second wave, but I don't think that they actually wrote the theory books until the third wave. And that was once they had teaching positions, then they started writing their little theory books.
Okay.
And that all went on, and then honestly, like my perception of it is that it died out. Okay, so it ended up becoming trendy, and there were things like the Riot Girl movement, which was in the late 80s, early 90s, and then
Yeah.
whole girl bands that were kind of like that,
Yeah.
and then we had the Spice Girls and shit like that that were sort of writing and things like maybe
Huh.
there were television shows and things that it was still trendy to try to be like, I'm a feminist all through the 90s. And then the Bush era happened, and then it was just so not cool to be like that. Like, it was not cool to dye your hair blue, and which it was. You remember the 90s. Like, there were girls who had blue hair who wore thick cat glasses, and they didn't shave, and they were like, I'm a feminist, and then it became very uncool to be like that during the Bush years, and not immediately, but by the end of the Bush years, everybody had MySpace hair, and it was this very different.
Wait, hold on. What's MySpace hair?
Do you remember? Were you on MySpace?
Yeah, but I didn't put my hair on MySpace.
There was this people call it emo hair. It's
Okay.
a certain type of hairstyle. So everybody was very different, and politically incorrect humor was really trendy. Everybody loved South Park all through the Bush years, and
Oh yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
know, yeah, and it was just this very, very kind of like it
Hmm.
just became, in terms of pop culture, feminism stopped being cool. But the gender studies departments never went away. They were always still there, and there were always still people who were being quietly converted into being feminists. They just, nobody thought that they were cool. And then what happened is, and I make the distinction that there's fourth wave feminism, and that it's very much something that is a separate beast. And fourth wave feminism was coined, I mean, because it's actually coined by feminists themselves. Like, they refer to fourth wave feminism occasionally, and there's a whole Wikipedia entry of it.
Okay.
And that started in 2008, when feminists started really blogging, basically. And once they really started writing blogs and using social media,
Ooh.
then it became this whole different thing. And and that's where the whole, like, where it's almost like, okay, like, let's say there were kittens, like feminism was a kitten that was born, and granted, we're just going to start with second wave feminism.
Okay.
If feminism was a kitten that was born in the 70s, the the third wave was when it got its claws. But then they clipped the claws during the Bush years. And then they forgot to clip them. And then it grew into a full grown cat, and the claws came back.
Okay.
And when they had the claws and the full grown cat, that was fourth wave feminism, because they could use social media to um, to bully people on the internet, and they just started, these massive smear campaigns and just relentless lying and stuff. So yeah.
And then they get entrenched in institutions by means of BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, all these, something that's not a blog anymore, that's got a wider distribution. Is that the arc that you're going along?
Well, yeah, it's a synergistic thing with the institutions. Like, the students read the blogs, and so they'll go and, like, call their teachers out and be like, oh, you're a sexist teacher. And, well, or like, let's say a teacher says that something about a black person, being like, oh yeah, a lot of people don't understand that Louis Farrakhan was a really big racist. And then their high school teacher is like, he can't be racist, he's black. And then and this other student films it, and then it, like, ends up on social media, and it's like, wait, how did that happen? Well, the student is reading the blogs, but then at the same time, a lot of those blogs are written by people who are part-time adjunct professors.
Yeah.
And it's this whole synergistic culture that I really think is only made possible by way of social media and the internet.
Okay. Um, so what's the essence of, I guess I still don't know. What's the key concept that defines feminism at this point in
I mean, patriarchy theory. Patriarchy theory.
time? Patriarchy theory? I thought patriarchy was real. Are you
Okay,
saying it's a
it
theory now?
depends on, no, okay. There's two different things. Like, okay, so there's the notion of the patriarchal aspects of society, which is real, that there are patriarchal aspects of society, obviously.
Okay, so define what you mean by patriarchal
I was about to
aspects.
do that. So
Okay.
what I mean by patriarchal aspects would be that in the West, it's generally the male name that is passed down to the female. And in the West, there are okay. That's the main one that comes to mind, and there's very few other things that I can really think of that are like completely patriarchal in the way that we actually run our society. Because there's, it's like you could point to the fact that the CEOs and the politicians are mostly men. Like you could
White
say that, but I
men.
yeah, um,
That's what Robin DiAngelo does.
yeah,
He's
and
like,
you could
look,
say that,
patriarchy.
but it's yeah, but that's not actually, there's not a system that makes it that way so much unless you were to um
Hmm.
unless you were to create like this gigantic almost conspiracy theory thing, and there's certain aspects that are slightly legitimate, but you have to, in order to justify that, you have to sit around in a room for at least 4 hours and talk about all these different factors. And then even still, you can never actually prove that all this, complicated systems of the school to prison pipeline and inherited wealth and blah, 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 blah. You can still never
Yeah.
prove that that makes it so that all the leaders are white men, and all the leaders aren't white men, but there's, mostly they are. And so that still means patriarchy, it's hit.
Okay.
But there is the tangible, metrics that you could say that because most CEOs and politicians are men, and also because um, male names get inherited to the children, then there's patriarchal aspects to society. Like you could say that, right? That's
Yeah.
one thing. But the patriarchy theory is what feminist theory is based upon, and what everybody who writes for the blogs sort of has to believe, and everybody who gets paid to be a full-time feminist professional, which there's a lot more full-time feminist professionals than people realize, and their only job is to perpetuate feminism generally, and they worm their way into positions of power in basically everywhere they can. Like
Yeah.
every non-profit type organization probably has one or two of them working for them. Like
Wait, a full-time uh, feminist with benefits?
well, it's weird. It's hard to say. Like, okay, so it's I don't know exactly how these people get paid, and if they because
They get paid in white male tears, man.
yeah. No, because if you listen to somebody like, okay, so there's this woman named Erin Pizzey who started the first domestic violence refuge in the UK, and she did not. Okay, so I'll say what the patriarchy theory is. It's the theory that all men collude either consciously or subconsciously to oppress all women and girls. And they also created these men that are a part of the patriarchy. This patriarchy that we live in, it's an abomination of nature. It's not the natural way of things.
Okay.
We live in a twisted society that is broken and held hostage by males and masculinity, basically, and we're oppressing all females either consciously or subconsciously with our masculinity. And if to the true believers in this theory, they believe that that marriage is just a form of slavery and that women are
Yeah.
the slaves,
Oppression.
and
Yeah.
they um they think that, and they also think that the patriarchy is the one that is what created gender roles, and that if it wasn't for patriarchy, then the distinction between male and females socially would be basically non-existent. um which I think that part wasn't part of the initial theory, and they sort of came up with that when they realized that they needed to justify their existence. And um, people people said, well, why is it really that men are the ones that are in power and that are earning the most money? Couldn't it possibly be based on biology and some sort of inherent difference between men and women. Like, men are stronger, so they work more dangerous positions, and they also are more likely to work 80-hour weeks to be a politician or a CEO, and not take time off for family stuff like a woman would. Don't you think that is part of the reason why men are these, high-ranking parts of society? And then the feminists said, no, 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 that's bullshit. No, no, there's no difference between men and women. It's the patriarchy that made it unfair. So give us some more money so we can change that. And that's kind of what I think is what happened. So they have all these things attached to patriarchy theory, and that's what it really is. And it's sort of like I think that it came from it's kind of a Marxist theory. It's basically a way of justifying giving money to feminist organizations. Ultimately, like, the whole theory is based around, give us more money to smash the patriarchy. What is the patriarchy? Well, it's whatever we say it is at any given moment.
So there's two things. I think this is a brilliant kind of adaptation of their rhetoric that, like you said earlier, men and boys collude consciously or subconsciously in the project of suppressing all women. Like, how can you subconsciously collude in anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is such a I don't know how to phrase this without coming off as a misogynistic, but like there's this feminine trait that's incredibly manipulative, which means that it gets you to believe in something by the leeward, or gets under your skin. Like, okay, you know what, you're bad. You don't know that you're bad,
Mm-hmm.
but you're bad. You have to trust me, because I'm going to use this word subconsciously. Now, I'm not saying that women themselves are the only who does that. I associate that with like a manipulative matriarchal mode of gaining power and sustaining power.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but as I go through like the documents that I've encountered at Evergreen, like these teaching tools and stuff, and I think that what's happening at Evergreen specifically, and at colleges in general, this whole diversity push, this whole intersectionality, it's a adaptation of feminism. Like and what it did was it took all these manipulation tactics that these feminists, not necessarily women, but just like in this feminist kind of like these bunkers somewhere, and all these low paying or middle paying positions in colleges, like they just generated all these techniques to get your way, to
Yeah.
reframe the argument, to win the argument. It's rhetoric, right? And then they replace the word woman with the word black, or they just replace these different signifiers,
Or
and
whoever's convenient at the moment.
yeah, and so it shows that. See, I want to be open to the possibility that feminism is generating something, or could be generating something that's actually a net positive for our society. Let's just, I want to say that. I want to posit that it does have, let's just say that it can be at the work of doing something good, but what I see manifesting are all these tactics to get your way, not to necessarily do anything good, but to get your way. And that's where and maybe that's why people consistently, with the people I talk to and the people that I listen to, they consistently tie it back to Marxism. They say, well, it goes back to this conflict theory. It goes back to Marxism. It's that, there's a subject there, which is a people, and then there's the object, which is what you want. You want a just society. And Marx kind of said, well, how do you get that just society? How do you justify getting that just society? Not building the just society or sustaining the
Yeah.
just society, but getting it,
Well, yeah, yeah,
acquiring
yeah.
it.
Making the case for everybody to follow your orders so that you
Yeah,
can, yeah.
yeah. I had a
I don't think that it comes from a theory. I don't think that, like, somebody was sitting around trying to be smart and they came up with some fucking theory, and then a bunch of people started to believe their fucking theory, and it just went from there. I don't think that that's what it was, personally. I think it's more like some women who had extremely abusive home lives growing up with personality disorders, who really, really hated men, ended up coming up with, who ended up coming across Marx and applying it to gender dynamics. And then they all found a little echo chamber with each other during the second wave of feminism. And they somehow made it into a industry. Oh, I forgot to mention the part about Erin Pizzey, because she's someone that Karen talks about, and I think they probably know each other by now. So Erin Pizzey started the first domestic violence refuge in in
Oh, okay.
1971, and in the UK. And this was, in the peak of second wave feminism, probably before anybody ever was starting to doubt second wave feminism and whether or not it was a good thing. Like, most everybody was probably thinking it was cool. And Erin Pizzey started the domestic violence shelter based around it just sort of seemed like the right thing to do, because it was during a time in which more and more women were leaving their husbands because it was becoming socially acceptable to get a divorce, and there were multiple women that were realizing that their relationships were bad because of domestic violence and stuff. And so there was this demand for for that. So she started a shelter, and I think that there was something like 100 beds or whatever. And what happened was, she came from an abusive background herself. Both of her parents were abusive, mainly physically. Her mother would beat her, and I don't think her father would usually beat her, but maybe her father beat her mother. So she she had this memory of that type of home life. And most of the women at her shelter were in situations like her parents were, where they were violent themselves. They were violent to their husbands, they were violent to their children, and they were violent to the other women in the shelter. But for her as an individual, it was very important to help those women, because those were the type of women that reminded her of her mother, that she could relate to, and also because she felt like they needed the most help. Because apparently, if a woman innocently comes across a man who just happens to be a total sick fuck and just beats his wife for no good reason, she doesn't actually really egg him on that much, and he's just a total psycho, she can get away from him and she can recover fairly well. But if a woman is actually violent herself, then that woman needs a lot more help, So what happened was, Erin Pizzey had this shelter, but there were these patriarchy theory, Marxist type feminists that were already on the scene. They saw that she was doing this, and they wanted their hand in the cookie jar. They were like, oh, we want to be a part of this. And they ended, but they were like, oh, but you oh, and she also allowed men into the shelter, at least for a while. And they said, no, you can't allow men, and you can't allow women that are violent. You can only allow women who are the victims of men. And she said, well, why? Because the most important women are the ones that are violent. Like, those are the ones that I need to help the most. And they said, no, because we do not believe that women are violent, so they cannot be here. And they ended up terrorizing this woman, like seriously terrorizing her. They basically stalked her everywhere she went, because she wouldn't kowtow and submit to their demands. They orchestrated a hostile takeover of her shelter, and they protested her everywhere she went, and then they eventually killed her family dog.
What?
And
What?
yeah.
Feminists don't kill animals?
Well, apparently, maybe they tricked a man into doing it for them. I don't know. But that's apparently what happened. And she fled the United Kingdom and to live in hiding in the United States. And she apparently didn't speak publicly for something like 10 years.
Okay.
So you take things like that into account. And she says that while that happened, the movement of when these women started opening up abuse shelters, but marketed at them as these things where it was for these innocent victims that were women, and that's only what it was. And then they came up with all these theories that like all domestic violence is the fault of men, and it's only the fault of men, which has been substantiated into law. Um,
Yeah.
and then there's this entire industry that's based around that, like this entire industry based around domestic violence counseling that is based around that premise, and raising awareness for rape culture, sexual assault. All of that stuff has a backbone in patriarchy theory, and there's people who get paid, people who are like trying to advocate for mandatory consent courses. Well, those people who are advocating for that, they are all paid by this, like they there's people who get money from the government to do
Yeah.
this, and they have workers. And Erin Pizzey says that the government, the annual budget in the United States is something like $2 billion that goes directly to the radical feminists of this industry. And that doesn't even include the costs for the publicly funded abuse shelters and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say, are they just getting a check from the government, or do they go into these nonprofit groups and get a paycheck from the nonprofit group, or do they get both, or what? But it really seems like there was a few women that had these, probably had abusive backgrounds and had some sort of personality disorders, and I'm not just saying that, like that's what Erin Pizzey says, like she
Yeah.
knew some of them, and she's like, no, they very clearly had personality disorders, and they talked about their abuse from their fathers and stuff. And they basically figured out a con, and it became this gigantic industry. And when people try to expose it and talk about what it really is, they smear them and they come up with lies about them. And these gigantic feminist smear campaigns are not uncommon. And I think that they use Marxist rhetoric to justify it all, but I think it sort of and that's a framework of all of it, but I think that sort of came secondary to these people's personality problems. That's my theory. I don't completely
Okay.
know.
But at a certain point, these individual personalities, they gain resonance in the cultural dynamic, and it starts to manifest. Like
Yeah.
what I think is that there's this personality, this group personality that's manifesting in colleges, like this current year across the nation. One ACLU talk was protested, where you had like this huge, did you see this one where there's like 20 students, and they get up there with their posters, and it was this spoken word event. Did you see this?
I remember hearing about it, but I don't think I saw the actual footage.
They go on and on and on, and then everybody's got, like, they're holding the signs in front of their faces so you can't see their faces, and they're reading, and it's call and response, right? And the big chain is like, liberalism is white supremacy, liberalism is white supremacy, right? And so the cameraman turns around, and the whole auditorium's empty. They're just performing for themselves. They shut down the event, everybody left, and they're just having fun with themselves. But and then the stuff that's happening down at Reed, it's so you have these individual people who are acting in a certain way that, and you can go say, we can look at this individual person and say, okay, we can make a judgment of their character, and then we can make an evaluation of their behavior. But the question is, why do these certain behaviors, these certain people who hold these certain behaviors, how do they gain the following of like 20, 30, or 200 people like an Evergreen?
Yeah.
How is this mindset been so enshrined in our culture that you have young people just like glomming on to this resonance? It's like a beehive. They're like, I want to vibrate with you too, like, let's vibrate in anger together
Well,
and change the world.
and also why is Naima Lowe so socially powerful? Like, why is it that people so obviously hang on her every word and are so obviously terrified of upsetting her? I mean, granted, I would be terrified of upsetting her too, but like, how?
She burns with the force of 1,000 suns. Right. And there's a certain alignment of traits, and she has a presence. I've been in the room with her. Like I've watched her, like, for the 4 years that I've been there. I've been at events where that she's been in control of, or in her classes and stuff. I never took a class with her, but I've visited her classes and stuff, and she has refined her ability to be a force among men, right? And I mean the term man, and it's agendered root, just
Oh,
like some sort of centrifugal force, or centrigal force, or whatever. Um,
centrifugal?
Centrifugal force? I don't
No,
know.
no, I
Somebody
think
in the
that's
chat
when,
will
isn't that when you
eventually
like
correct me.
spin on the merry-go-round and
Yeah, there's a force. I don't know. She's got a gravitational pull. Plus, she's got this rhetoric that she's perfected, and then plus she's a big black woman with a little yippy dog on her. And I've seen her. And actually, I was surprised because, like, the second year I was there at Evergreen, I was in an orientation session where she and another faculty were in charge of this orientation session, and she was kind of like, um, just speaking from a state of being angry, right? And she was just like, she's generating her anger at, what she's angry at, which is, we all know what she's angry at, or whatever. You can go do research. It's very obvious what she's angry at. Anyway, she was generating anger toward her familiar angry object. And I was like, I don't like this. I'm doing tech support. I'm like, why are you teaching people this? But then I saw her, like, soften up. Like, the next couple of years, I saw her, like, soften up and say, sometimes this, but sometimes that, and sometimes this and sometimes that, and actually get less radical. But then what happened, I've traced it back, because she got extremely radical after these two young black men got shot in 2015, and that flipped that switch for her. And not just for her, though, but the whole community at Evergreen looked at her, because she's the one who'd been talking about this. She's the one who'd been, like, generating anger toward this, like, authority figure, that usually is white and usually is male and usually has a cop uniform, whatever. So they gave her a lot of attention.
she
And
was
I
like,
think that
she thought it was, she's like, oh, it's my moment.
I don't know. I want to give her as much benefit as possible, because
Uh-huh.
I think we need to give her as much benefit as possible, and actually see this as a situation where certain kind of triggers happened, where it manifested behavior in her, and then it manifested behavior in her students, which, some of the
Yeah.
most famous Evergreen actants are, tied to her, and their rhetoric is certainly tied to her. But I think that we need to abstract that and say, how do these certain personality types, um, these certain persons who exhibit these certain personality types, are empowered by this system, right? So if feminism is largely adopted by society, or even just a corporation, or even just a school, and not just feminism, but let's say intersectionality, right? And let's include race in there. Um, and once it's adopted, in the case of Evergreen, what behavior does it manifest? So we can look at the certain people who are the key actants, George Bridges, two students that I don't want to name yet, and then Naima Lowe. Like, how do they behave? And then what's the reaction? And then how do people follow them? And then we can see how this system will replicate itself over and over and over again. That's my hypothesis. And if it's true that what happens at Evergreen is going to happen over and over and over again, or like what you were saying with the example with Erin Pizzey,
Yeah.
and she's talking about certain personality types taking over feminism, or manipulating things to get into power, and then generating a certain behavior pattern. How can we, one, make people wise to these behaviors, and two, disempower them at the root level,
Uh-huh.
as far down as possible? How can we make people say, you know what, that's silly. We're not going to act like that,
Yeah.
or that's a silly way of thinking.
Well,
You know.
yeah, I think that you know, so much of this is obviously came as a result of George, the president, and him beyond enabling. It was almost like this is what he wanted to happen, but he was never admitting it or something. Like it was this. It just seems so okay. When I look at
Hmm.
Brett Weinstein, obviously he's very sincere. He obviously, somebody that seems like he went through a lot. And when I look at Naima Lowe, she seems like she totally believes her rhetoric too. Like and that's completely understandable. I have always considered myself somebody who has uh been, what's the word, I don't like using the word sympathetic, but I definitely accept that there's a lot of strife and trouble within the Black community, and there is a lot of racism, and it's not going away, and it did not just go away during the Obama years and blah 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 blah. Like, I will totally admit
Okay.
to that, and I can completely understand why somebody who studies things like race relations full time, regardless of what slant they go down, regardless of whether there's somebody that I would really like, or whether there's somebody that goes down this, kind of rabbit hole of believing that we live in a society that was deliberately made to benefit all white people at the expense of, of all racial minorities, and that it's this thing that still exists to this day that, regardless of whether I am very critical of that, I can still see why either somebody who is a complete rationalist that I agree with, who is Black, would be angry, and why somebody who's a total fanatic would be angry. Both those people, I think, is a reasonable outcome. I mean, I have a tendency
Okay.
to occasionally be an angry gay male, and I go off on my, like, which everybody on YouTube would probably not think I'm like that, because I generally don't talk about like gay issues all that much, because
Okay. So you're saying not just an angry person who happens to be gay, but like an angry all those things align.
yeah, being angry about being a gay guy, like,
Okay.
that happens. I
Yeah.
totally have been through phases in my life where I do that, and
Yeah.
I can see that with other minorities, and or I can see it with fucking straight white guys. You currently, when straight white guys tell me, "Oh my god, it fucking sucks to be a straight white guy right now," I'm like, I can see how it would, like, I can totally see that.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I look at Naima Lowe, and I see somebody who is at least sincere, you know? But I look at George, and there's something very wrong about him. Like, there's something, like, I just feel as if it's like, dude, is he
Hmm.
somebody that got caught doing something really, really bad, and then somebody is blackmailing him into like, do you see what I'm saying? Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay. See, the thing is, and I need to talk to him, and I feel like I've burnt that bridge
Uh-huh.
already, but I need to talk to him because you look at him and you go through. I mean, I'm like, okay, are you Charlie Brown or are you Machiavelli? And if you're both, like, how do you make that work? Like, how do you put those two things? So either he's like very sincere and he's a
Uh-huh.
very humble man, and you can read things two ways with him. I think he's a beautiful subject actually, because if you look at one way, you're like you see him in one way, and then you look at the other way and you see him in another way. Because it doesn't really make sense. Like, why do you
No,
let
it
this
doesn't.
happen? And and then why do you say this? And then you go into another room and then you're saying this other thing. And like I've gone through the videos of him, and he changes his speech patterns
Uh-huh.
depending on who he's talking to. It's um and so it depends on who is affected by him. They're either like he's an idiot and he's a cock or whatever, or he's like this mastermind. or whatever. And like, maybe he's like a genuinely sincere man who spent his whole career, like what he spent his career doing, insofar as public service. He spent a lot of time teaching, but like, I know he was involved in like trying to make the Washington prison system and the court system more equitable to the Black community, because there's this huge problem. And like, you know, if you look at the numbers of like, how much the Black community ends up in the court system and is imprisoned, and he spent a lot of time doing that. So when he came to Evergreen and these Black students came to him, you're like, listen, the world is fucked up, our institution's fucked up. Maybe you just said, you know what, institutions are fucked up, and you guys have got the raw deal, and it's our turn to turn that. It's our time to turn that around. Like, maybe he sincerely thought that, like, you know, carte blanche, we're going to give you guys everything you need, because it's finally time to do that. And if that's the case,
Uh-huh.
if that's the case, like, what I was thinking the other day, I'm like, okay, what he did was he gave them the opportunity to be great. You know, it's like, okay, here's your time. Like, I'm going to give you guys everything you need to take full advantage of this. I'm going to give you all the power in the world, as much as I can give you. But unfortunately, he didn't teach them how to be great. He gave them the capacity to be great, but not
Yeah,
how to be great.
you could call it the soft bigotry of high expectations.
Huh.
That's a video title that I'm gonna write within the next few days, for the record.
Yeah, I'm working on burning bridges, but I still want to interview him, so I don't want to do the burning bridges episode till after I have
Oh,
to
I
talk
just
to him.
remembered that his last name was Bridges. Okay, I didn't get it when you said that before.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I thrive on puns. You know, it's how it all ties together in the end. One monogamous pun.
um yeah, no, it definitely could be the case that like he worked so long. I mean, I think another thing that people should keep in mind about Washington state is that it is a very, very white state, but not entirely. If you go
Okay.
if you go outside of Seattle, there's one city mainly that has a lot of Black people, and that's Tacoma, Washington. And in Seattle, there have historically been a lot of Black people in the actual inner city, though they've largely been pushed out and they're starting to relocate into certain suburbs. But it's this weird thing where, like, if you go to Idaho, there's no Black people. And if you go to
Yeah.
Oregon, there's similarly very, very, very few Black people. But there's actually a decent amount of Black people in Seattle and
Okay.
in Tacoma. And I grew up in the inner city going to my middle school was about 80% Black. And it it was fucked up because this whole school to prison pipeline thing, I totally saw evidence of that. It was a shithole for the most part.
Can you define that, please?
Yeah, I'll
School to
tell you.
prison.
Yeah, it is the weird systemic things that make it incredibly likely that just by going to school, you will also end up in prison. And I'll tell you an example or two about that. Like, when people mention it, but they don't really talk about like how it actually works.
Yeah.
For one thing, there's things like 3 strike you're out laws, and there's marijuana being on a Schedule 1 drug or whatever like that. But then there's these things like how in my middle school, not even fucking high school, in my middle school, you could be tried as a juvenile criminal for cutting class. And
Okay.
and then the reason that I went to the school that I did was because I was in a gifted program, and so I was bused into the school, and it was in a Black neighborhood. And the classes and the teachers and we always had computers in our classes and all that kind of thing, right?
Okay.
And but the gifted programs, the various gifted programs, there was a few. We were about 20% of the school, and we were mostly white and Asian. And then the rest of the school was majority Black. You know, it was about 80% Black. And they had really, really shitty classes, really, really shitty teachers. The teachers did not give a fuck about them. And then next door in the class next, in the class right over, there was these like really, really cool teachers that, taught us all about opera and were really into like, and so can you imagine being a young black kid and like knowing that like the white and Asian kids are in a public school are being treated like so much better than you? Like,
Yeah. Okay.
and that would, and it's all based around the fact that we were given a standardized test when we were in the second grade, and some of us did well on it and some of us didn't, and like it
Yeah.
just would
Right.
seem very, very arbitrary. And so, like, yeah, a lot of people would cut class, and then who's actually going to get tried as a juvenile criminal? I mean, theoretically, it could happen to anybody, but I think that the black kids were probably going to be more likely to cut class. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily institutional racism, blah, 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 but I will say that it does primarily affect black and probably Latino students and in other areas and Native American students. Though there's not a whole lot of Latino people in Seattle. But so yeah, you get tried as a juvenile criminal, and that becomes on your record. And I'm not sure if there's 3 strike you're out laws in Washington State, but there undoubtedly are in other places, and just things like that. And I can totally see why somebody like George Bridges would spend his career looking at things like that and looking into the data and being like, oh, there's if you come from this neighborhood, you're so much more likely to end up in prison, and these are the mostly black neighborhoods, and these are the reasons why, and blah, 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 blah. And then you get to and then and then you run with the crowd that really cares a lot about those issues, and they are people who end up sort of, taking things a little bit too far, and saying, George, as cool as you are and as smart as you are and as well-meaning as you are, you're still a white guy and you can never understand. And he spends a lot of time with those people, and finally, they sort of convince him that his job is to be the most effective ally, and then he becomes the president. And in his head, he's not thinking that it's his job to be the president. He's thinking it's his job to be the ally that happens to be in the position of president.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like, I want to excuse his behavior personally, but like when I assess his behavior as a president of a college, like that one statement, and I've used this statement probably 3 or 4 times, and I feel like I'm cheating by keep on bringing up this one thing he said to a council meeting. But he said that I felt safe and I was concerned when I was surrounded by the students and my faculty were surrounded, right? And you're like, what is he going to say? That if the police came, then there would be violence, right? And like, but I feel safe. He says, I feel safe. Like I understand that. I'm like, there's like 400 people under you, and probably at least 100 of them don't feel safe, George. Like
Yeah.
maybe you feel safe, but like as an administrator, like calling, I got the records for the day. I'm waiting on more, but and I got some records of the police logs, just like this audio log of the day of the major protests and stuff. And it's interesting because like the police aren't panicking, but and there's not a lot of calls of people panicking. So it's not like the students are going way overboard. They're stopping people at cars. They're walking around, getting people and forcing them. They have control of the situation, and the cops are like, well, we don't have any control, but we have all the responsibility, right? No
Mhm.
authority, all the responsibility. The kids have all of the authority and none of the responsibility. And it would just take one incident for that to completely spiral out of control.
Mhm.
We have some weird sound. Um, but the thing is that so nothing really violent happened during the protest. I mean, it was a sight to behold for sure, right? But the young people, the college students, got right to the edge, and nobody ever went off the edge. But what happens the next time? that something just goes right off that tiny little ledge where like we're gonna make fun of you, we're gonna mock you, we're gonna tell you what to do with your body, and somebody's like, you know what, that's not enough. We need violence. We need to actually physically exert our power over this person, and you know, and so it he just barely averted like total disaster. I mean, it was a total disaster, but if things have gone just a little bit further, he would have had no control, and the police would have had no control. Like the students would have had all the control.
Mhm.
They weren't smart enough or articulate enough or violent enough to completely take control of that situation. But
I
so
one thing that I think about though, and just in terms of the actual dynamic, is I feel like while the students would definitely deny it, and they would definitely deny this, they're total authoritarians. They're very, very hardcore authoritarians. They
who the insurgency, the students?
Yeah,
Okay.
those the supposed anarchists or the anarcho-communists or whatever the fuck, blah 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 blah. These are people that are
Well,
filled.
hold on. We're all authoritarians as long as we're the authority, though.
Yes and no. I don't think that these people actually want to be the authority. I think that these are people that got caught up in rhetoric from people like, okay, I remember how I made that one really long comment under your one video and you pinned it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things I said is that if you look at anytime Naima Lowe speaks, everybody in the room hangs off her every word. Like they all
Okay.
know that they better listen to Naima Lowe, and if they better pay very close attention, because if they have to nod their head when she says something important, or maybe snap their fingers or something. And if she makes a joke, they better laugh, but never if she's not making a joke. So they have to look at that's sort of what I think that everybody obviously does. This The same thing happens when that Jamil person, or whatever that person's name is, who is the black student who has the pink tied in their hair, who I think is transgender. Um, every time,
I'm not going to mention that person, but technically they are a femme.
okay, yeah. So um, that person has the same dynamic with their friend group. If you watch the Vice interview,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's very clear that when that person talks, all the white girls listen.
Yeah.
And so the vast majority of these, and I think that that person probably takes orders from Naima. And I think Naima probably looks up to somebody else, And I mean, I don't know, maybe Naima, I have no idea. It's not like I've really studied who she is as an individual. But ultimately, I think that these are people who are authoritarians. They've been led to believe that they're supposed to overthrow the student body, and that everything's going to be more fair that way, or not the student body, but even potentially all of Western civilization, and we're going to live in intersectional feminist utopia or whatever. But ultimately, in their emotional core, at their the very presence of their being, that affects every single waking moment of their day, they know that they don't want to be in charge. And so they're never going to push it to that limit, because what would that mean? Well, that would mean that they're running the show. Oh, well, I don't want to do that. I'm just a kid.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hmm.
But it could, if there was the right leader, it could lead to that point where they're like, yeah, it's totally permissible to fucking, beat up the president. I'm your leader. Do it. Maybe that would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I, I try to stay positive about people. I mean, okay, there are people who are evil to their core. I
Hmm.
mean, you run a YouTube channel, I run a YouTube channel. You know when it's time to say, you know what, I don't want this guy commenting on my videos. He has got nothing to
Yeah.
say, or girl. But I got a little charcuterie. Uh, so I think it's really important for us to examine like the character. Like I think that's why, you know, I go back to literature. Like why study creative writing, or why read books, right? Because when you read a really good book that takes its time with all of its characters, the good guy isn't all good, and the bad guy isn't all bad.
Hmm.
So it inoculates us to the truth, the reality that all of us are filled with we're all of us are bursting with all these different motivations, all these different competing values, right? And given the right circumstances, any one of us will become the hero, and given the right circumstances, any one of us can become like the villain, right?
Hmm.
So I do want to shy away from, well, one, because I'm still connected to the community, so that's why I'm like, well, I don't want to judge people because I'm still connected to it. But like, I think it's important if we can look past, you know, like with Jamil, and see, well, why is he acting that way? And insofar he was the leader of the, you know, the at least on the 24th of May, he was like the central character of that. And like, and then in the Vice documentary too, he's got his little coterie, you know, and then, you know, okay, well, running around with bats, you know, like actually beating people up who are chalking on the sidewalk. We want class, you know, like
But I also
I get.
didn't know. I also, you know, like looking at your clips, and maybe I haven't watched everything. I also never noticed Jamil being particularly um antagonistically aggressive against an individual. I saw Jamil doing a lot of like performative gestures to get everybody riled up, but
No,
it was the girls who were like threatening people and shit.
no, you're right. You're right. Actually, you're right. He never. Yeah, no. He indirectly manipulated groups,
But
and
maybe he didn't
I
even.
think
Maybe it wasn't even like manipulation. Like I don't know if I want to say like because I've known a lot of people that are like that. Like I was a teenage raver, and yeah.
is this your memoirs? I was a teenage raver.
I was a teenage raver, and I knew a lot of like queer and trans people that were a lot like this Jamil person in the 90s. But that was back in the day when, you know, if you were somebody like that, born in a black family, you'd probably get thrown out. And so these people would end up being like homeless ravers, and I would hang out with them. And these people, a lot of the time, they just wanted people to take them seriously and to pay
Yeah,
attention to them.
yeah.
And they had a lot of anger, and they would sometimes throw crazy tantrums at raves. Like you'd be in the smoking area, and
Huh.
they'd start screaming about how their parents kicked them out, and their friends, like some girl on ecstasy, would hug them and they'd cry on the girl's bosom, you know.
Beautiful image there.
Yeah.
I just see glitter just like passing from boob to face and face to boob, just like glitter everywhere.
So, you know, and like, yeah, sure, there's like the anger uh but I think that with, you know, there's a potentiality, and like, you know, it is totally rude to speak about this Jamil person too much, because all we have is a very brief amount of clips, and then these series of events with people being arrested that happened actually very quickly, and this went on over a short period of time. So we don't, you know, I don't want to like assign too much motive to this person. I feel more safe speaking about Naima, because this is a pattern of Naima's behavior, and even with what you're saying, there's that you want to be more forgiving of Naima and everything. But with this Jamil person, it's
Hmm.
um this is a very young person that got caught up in this weird thing, and now they've been on Vice and on like a million YouTube videos, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's a very strange position to find yourself in as a young person. But you know, ultimately, it really could have just been this thing where this person noticed people paying attention to them for the first time in their life,
Yeah.
and that's all it
Yeah.
was. And then these white girls are like trying to prove themselves as not spoiled rich girls because they feel guilty about being spoiled
Oh
rich girls.
God.
And that's what
the
they
white
do.
girls. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's not so much like I think a lot of um, this is such an interesting situation because you have this racial incident where the raciality is kind of reversed, where you have these black students being kind of rather racist against a white professor, but it's not really like the dynamics between like the blacks and the institution are one thing to look at and suss over and even to make snap judgments on, and like there's a lot of like racist things that you could say, just like judge all black people because these like 4 or 5 black people like in this instance acted that way. But the real problem, the
Mhm.
real thing that we need to look at, and I brought this up earlier, is like all those allies. There's
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of allies. Like, oh, finally, I have something that makes my life meaningful, like
Yeah.
other than my video games and like worrying if a guy's going to think I'm too fat, like this is my time.
Yeah.
I'm going to yell,
And that's what Brett said very early on. I think that, I don't know if he said that to you or to one of the several other interviewers, but they asked him, did you feel physically threatened? And he said, I want to make it very clear that I didn't feel physically threatened by the people of color, but I did feel physically threatened by the white anarchists that were with them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so there's the allies, which are just the young people who are along for the ride, and the well-meaning allies too.
Hmm.
I don't mean to cast everybody into a stereotype, but then there is that anarchist. There is that anarchist contingent, and so we can go back and talk about another person. I don't like talking about people, but like this Zoltan Grossman, professor of Native Studies and Geography. He's written several articles and several very long forum posts and email posts during the whole event and after the whole event, and trying to do damage control. And I don't think he's controlling so much as damaging, but like that's my opinion. Um, but what he did, like, so Patriot Prayer came to town, right?
Mm.
You have this guy named Joey Gibson, and then like his coterie of friends, like gonna show the Kekistani flag and gonna show the American flag and say free speech, free speech. And automatically at the institution of Evergreen, they're like, oh, these are Nazis. Like, oh, a Nazi showed up, and
Hmm.
that Nazi that showed up to the rally killed 2 people. Ah, Nazis. And they had like a great, and like I have these documents. Like, what are you talking about? Like, um, anyway, automatically the story was that Patriot Prayer is the bad guys and we're the good guys. And what
Hmm.
happened was that you have Patriot Prayer on one side, and then you have like the good guys, like the Evergreen people, and then you have Antifa, right? Who are just there to fuck shit up. That's
Hmm.
all they want to do. They're like, okay, finally, we have a reason to fuck shit up. We're just waiting for a reason to fuck shit up, right?
Hmm.
And I'm not going to say that every one of those people are necessarily wanting to do that. Like maybe they have good justifications, but like once you're all dressed in the same color and
Hmm.
once you're hiding your face, you become a mob.
Yeah.
You erase your individuality.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. And the thing is that what happened on the 24th of May with the big library event, like the big takeover, hold people hostage, and I was in the library. Like I don't want to have anything to do with that, because either you're in that group and you become one entity,
Hmm.
and you take on like it's just like a cult, but it's all compressed down into one moment, or like one little event. Like this is the one moment we're going to erupt. I'm been playing with this theory of like you become like it's like a holographic mind, where like there's this reality, and each one of us has just one little bit of that reality. Not one of us can see it, but like all together we can see it. And so the only way that your actions actually matter is if you are working with the whole group. And so it just takes
Hmm.
just a tiny bit, just a tiny push to turn that mob into something that will create irrevocable havoc to the individuals in that mob, and then to individuals that mob interacts with. Um,
Hmm.
and so the weird dynamic on that day where Patriot Prayer came to town, and then you have the Evergreen people like writing these posters about love, and then you have Evergreen people writing posters about the cops are bad, and then you have like the Antifa is like, we just want to like, I saw some of their like write-ups about that. Like they just wanted to stir up shit because it was time to do that. And then you have like the police just like in a line. So it was interesting to see that Evergreen unintentionally, this peace and love and inclusion, and diversity and equity and equality and freedom and all these different things, they, in that moment, on that field of play where you have like red square, they were on the side of the most dangerous block. Like the most dangerous pieces in that game board were actually on the side of this nominally peace and loving thing. And they were blind to that. That's why I wanted to get to. They were blind to that because they automatically said that all the evil is way over here on this side of the screen. Therefore, anything closer to me is going to be automatically good. And it's unfortunate that you have a professor and a lot of professors actually writing up and thinking that way. And that's taking place in class now. Actually in class right now, I'm receiving word, I don't want to be too specific, but like these teachers who believe in this stuff, they're playing that out, that miniature game in that class where they're
teachers that believe in what stuff?
Okay, not believe in something, but the professors who are operating under the rubric that equity is good, that the
Okay.
ends of
Yeah.
equity justify all the means, right?
Yeah. The ones that they don't seem to understand that if they own a home, they will be asked eventually to give up that home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of the teachers, like she writes in her emails, and then she's quoting Felix, but she's like, what is equity but the willingness to give something up? But I don't think she really wants to give things up. I think she wants to teach other people to give things up.
Yeah, it's such a weird weird mentality. Oh, I was gonna say, you were talking about the mob and the fuck shit up. It reminded me of something that happened in college. So I went to a school that had a lot of students that were like this, but not that many because the college that I went to was a bit kind of expensive, and it was in Manhattan, New York City, which is expensive to live in. So there wasn't the same type of kind of anarchist, crusty granola culture that sort of exists in Olympia, Washington. Anyway, if people are probably unfamiliar with Olympia, Washington, but it's a very cheap place to live. Like, it's not expensive to, like, even to this day, you can probably find a $300 room fairly easily in Olympia, right?
Yeah. It's
So
not like Seattle.
Not like Seattle, yeah. So yeah, people, there's a lot of people that live in Olympia that don't go to Evergreen, but they hang out with Evergreen kids and probably would go to Evergreen to go to a protest because that's fun for them. And these are the same type of anarchist kids that are, they're pseudo political. They mostly probably go to punk rock shows if there is one, or they go to a protest during the day and then go to the punk rock show. And there's really only a handful of kids who are actually really into the politics. And the other ones only are political enough as long as it are political enough as it is cool to be political. Like, and I was almost like that a little bit in the way that I would sort of attend protests sometimes in college, but I would say that I was a little bit more critical minded than most of the other kids that I knew. And
can you tell us which decade we're talking about?
Early 2000s.
Okay.
So this was during the beginning of the Bush years and the breakout of the Iraq War, and all through when Bush got reelected. And I knew these people, like I knew these political type people, and I had an ex-boyfriend in particular who had a bunch of friends from his home state. He grew up in Massachusetts, and he knew a bunch of, like, he was friends with all the punk anarchist type kids in his town. Like, that was his crew. And for the record, I was the only boyfriend that he ever had. He is now married with a child. So
call the wild, man.
I was his college thing. I was his college experimentation. So I met a number of his friends that were like that, and I was always a little bit more critically minded, and I also took classes with some of the more radical, the true believers, the people that were actually really into the Marxism and into the feminism and stuff. And I could tell that there was something wrong with their thought process. Like I would, but only enough to know that there was something wrong with them, not enough to actually investigate into it in depth myself and really debunk it. I just was kind of like, okay, I'm not a Marxist because the Marxist kids are weird, and I'm not a feminist because the feminist kids are weird. But they mean well. They mean well. You know, that was kind of like how I thought about it. And then there were the anarchist kids, like my ex-boyfriend was friends with. They were just dumb. Like they didn't even. Like I don't even think that they had ever even like hung out with one of the feminists, but like I don't think that they like took a college class with one of the hardcore feminist Marxist people. I don't even think they went to college. I think that they just got a hold of a fucking flyer and showed up. And they literally did say, like, my ex-boyfriend got arrested at the Republican National Convention in 2003.
Okay.
Before Bush was elected for the second time, and the Republican National Convention was in New York City for some reason, and him and all his friends went to go protest. And I remember very specifically not going because I was like, "There's no point." It's like, what protest for what? Of course, there's going to be a million people. It's in New York. They probably had it in New York so that there would be a million people protesting. That's probably part of their plan. And they were like, no, we're gonna go fuck shit up. And I'm like, you're probably gonna get arrested or something. And then they all got arrested, and they all peed in the back of the paddy wagon together. Like they were they were in there for
on each other then.
No, they had to. They were in it for a really long time because of a massive amount of people. And so eventually they all just started peeing in their pants. And yeah, that's the story I remember. But I remember these people and like meeting them, and it was I think that they even had a day that they called like National Fuck Shit Up Day, and they were just like doing petty vandalism and I remember being very critical of it, but they and my ex-boyfriend was just kind of like, oh, you're such a square sometimes, and that was sort of the reaction. Like there was no thought. There literally was no thought behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So the weird thing is, like, I like to abstract. Like, so we have these characters. Like, okay, well, let's look at the pattern. Like, let's get philosophical about that. But the thing is, without those individual characters acting in an individual way, there's no story, right? There's nothing to talk about until eventually, like, one person acts in a manner, and then we can like start spindling theories about that. So there is a tension between like saying that we do need to make a judgment about these certain actors and like this certain pantheon, in the evergreen Olympia, which is the mount where all the gods live. Like there's this arrangement of gods up there. And we need to go through and say, okay, why did this person do that? Why did this person do that? And are they an idiot or are they not an idiot? Are they a good person or are they a bad person? Like, what's the scales, I do want to suspend judgment on that. But at the same time, if I suspend judgment too much, there's no story. But the thing is that if we don't suspend judgment, then we can't see how all those characters are potentialities and that can be replicated over and over and over again in any given institution, given the right mixture of factors. Right. So there is a moral to the story, but that's not to say that the story isn't the story, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's one thing to keep in mind is that they're all hipsters.
Hipsters?
Yeah, to a certain degree. And when I say hipster, I just mean that these are all people that are trying to be cool. Like, at least the students, I wouldn't say necessarily Naima. Well, no, she makes her hair all crazy and bleaches it and stuff.
Okay, so by hipster you mean like somebody that wants recognition.
Yeah, but in this very like the only really good word for it is cool. Like they want to be cool. They don't necessarily really want to be smart. They don't necessarily really want to be rich. They don't really necessarily want to be anything tangible. They want to be cool. And it's really, really weird. And I say this as somebody who used to be very much like that.
Wait, you mean cool or wants to be cool?
Wants to be cool.
Okay.
And maybe I was. I was on a record label, so maybe I was.
Wait. You had your own record or label?
I was signed onto the record label.
Oh, cool. Doing like what kind of music?
Electronic music with vocals.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So you're the music playing in the background while the guy is like has his face, the angry emo hipster guy's got
I was both.
face in the bosom of the.
Oh yeah, I was also a DJ. I was also a DJ in the late '90s too. So
Okay.
yeah, that could have actually happened at some point while I was DJing. That could have happened. Maybe not the same night that I was DJing though. But
anyways, you have sympathy for those who want to be cool, the hipsters.
Well, I don't know if I have. Yeah, I have to have sympathy for them because it's yeah. But one of the things I realized is that there was a profound difference between me and the vast majority of hipsters, and I was part of the rare. Oh, actually, I came up with a word for it, and it was the only word that I tried to coin on the Urban Dictionary, but it was already taken, and it basically was the same thing as what I had wanted it to be.
At least you tried.
It was legitster. And the legitster is somebody who, it's not that, it's not so much that we think that we're cool and we're trying to do whatever's perceived as cool. It's that we're actually like this. Like we actually
are cool.
Well, or we do things that end up becoming trendy in a few years because we're actually really into them.
Okay.
I actually was really.
So when you were really into something before it got big, you were like really into it before the people who were into it before it got big.
Something like that. But yeah. I was very, I would say, I don't want to say nerdy exactly, but kind of nerdy in the way that I would play a lot of video games in high school or in middle school. And then when I got into high school, I started getting more into music, and that led me to electronic music, and that led me into DJing.
Yeah.
But that was during the 90s rock era. And I was like one of the early ravers that was into like, avant-garde electronic music. And then everybody got into it. But it was because I was really, really into it. It wasn't because I thought that this was, it wasn't simply like I definitely became curious in it because I wanted to be cool, but then I got really, really into it, and I was into stuff that nobody else liked, and I was like, you guys just don't get it, but really very few people liked it. But then in a few years, everybody liked the music that I had been listening to.
Well, can you extrapolate, because you said that there's a gulf between the
so there's the people who are like that, and we're just people that, I would say that you're probably fairly similar to that in the way that you are interested in being a writer and, like trying to see the world and dissect it for like what it is and everything. And then there's people who are interested in, they're sort of like the authoritarians and people who are always looking for a leader, and people, who would never be into the music that I was into unless somebody else that they respected told them that it was cool.
Okay, so there's certain people who need a critical mass to justify their delight.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and also a leader, a figure, some sort of something that justifies it. That not necessarily the mass, but the trendsetter. It used to be last decade Vice magazine. Like anything that Vice magazine said was cool, and now I don't really know if there's any sort of uniform thing, but there's a lot of different.
Cool.
What?
There's air pockets of cool.
Yeah, like it probably like 5 years ago, maybe or 4 years ago, maybe like Jezebel, the feminist thing, the feminist rag, the feminist propaganda site, or I don't know if a propaganda site is the best word for it, but the vile, hateful feminist blog that actually employed a few clever, witty writers that that there's a few Jezebel articles that are entertaining
Yeah.
if you have a strong stomach for just vile man hating.
I do. Sign me up.
Yeah. So like I could show you guys articles from 2013, which is like, okay, I can see how this would have seemed edgy and funny at the time if you didn't realize how much of an epidemic man hating would become by 2015, 2016.
Okay, so is it an epidemic?
I would say on a cultural level, I would say yes, just considering the absolute mainstream level of in both man hating and white people hating, and it affects the gay community. I mean, like if you're a gay man and you talk to like a massive amount of gay men, including gay white men, they will say, yeah, gay white men are awful. They're all racist. I can't believe they don't date. I can't believe so many people put that they don't want to date Black or Asian guys on their hookup profiles, blah, blah, blah. And everybody goes, but that's not, like, I would say more people talk about how much they hate the fact that white gay guys don't date Black and Asian guys than there are guys that still actually put on their profile that they don't want to date Black and Asian guys.
Yeah.
Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, everybody's posting on their Facebook wall, yeah, I hate racist white guys, but there's very few racist white guys. And so that's where, and then if you start to even mention that, then they attack you for being a racist white guy. And it's just this obvious thing where their narrative has become the dominant cultural narrative, and it's hateful and it's vindictive, and they have no room for discussion about it. Like it's not simply the dominant cultural narrative, but it's this, they think that they're being the rebels and that they're sticking up for justice, but what they're actually doing is bullying people in this very uniform way. And if people actually even mention it honestly, then they attack that person too.
Uniformed bullies, isn't that fascism? Can we agree on the final definition of fascism? Is that?
Yeah, kind of. People say that fascism is supposed to require some sort of governmental power behind it.
Okay, you're getting all theoretical and stuff. So when you've made 400 videos.
No, like 350.
Okay,
so.
350, maybe 375.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. But the ones that I've seen, like you're on a track. I'm not going to say you're anti this or anti that, but it seems like you are concerned about something, and that you're trying to either describe some. What would you say? Why do you talk about the things that you talk about? Why do you make videos about the things that you make videos? Why are you criticizing culture, and what are you trying to get at?
I realized that none of us are going to be safe unless we identify the problem for what it is. And this whole, it does start to look like communism.
Okay.
It does look like that. And we've been talking about all these different things and all these different factors, and there's so many different pieces of evidence that point to this sort of notion that so if the globalists, I'm gonna go there and actually say the word globalists, but it's true. Like there is definitely a very obvious symbiosis between or synergistic cooperative nature between certain nations, particularly the European Union, the United States, Canada, and or at least the United States Democrats, and then other things. And then you look at places like Canada, Germany, and you start to look at evidence like and this is just very, very basic, tangible evidence, like the fact that Angela Merkel is censoring the crap out of the German people now. Like they can get arrested for liking something on Facebook. Like that's actually happened.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why. Did you notice that you didn't really see any YouTube videos about the recent German election? Like nobody was making videos about him.
Oh no, I didn't notice that.
Well, that was a weird thing. Turned out that Angela Merkel went up for re-election for her 4th term, and almost nobody ever talked about it. Well, Germany was threatening to sue YouTube if they wouldn't take down negative, like videos that they considered hate speech, which obviously could be anything. And then I looked into Angela Merkel a little bit more because I was starting to think that all of it was kind of weird. She was a fucking full-blown communist, like a ranking member of the Communist Party in East Germany. So that's a known thing. And she kind of brushes it off and is like, oh, well, that, I had to work in the propaganda department in order to go to college. So but it's kind of like, okay, but that's a significant thing. Like that is a significant thing. And there's people, I think that the guy's name is like David Horowitz, who he was on the Dave Rubin show. He's convinced that, and this is not an unreasonable guy. Like this is not somebody that, like, I'm going to say this and it's going to sound kind of wacky, but he was really smart. And the way he spoke sounded like an aging man who's been fighting a battle for a very, very long time, who knows what he's saying is true, but is used to people not believing him, is what it sounded like. And he was like, oh, yeah, Obama's a communist. No, he is. No, he's total communist. Total communist. He was raised by a communist. He acts like a communist. I mean, he's a communist. He's not going to just say he's a communist. They all are like that. I don't know if he and it's funny. And I started thinking about it. Remember the Obama campaign? Those hope signs? They were directly modeled after communist propaganda.
Yeah. Well, there's an aesthetic tradition.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you use chunky primary colors and stuff, I mean, you're going to look like a propaganda. I mean, that's just propaganda.
Yeah. So we have all of these things, and then there's a very known history of all of these, critical race theory type organizations and Marxist feminist organizations. One of the things that communists did, and we know that they did this because there's a lot of historical record of this during the McCarthy era, when people were being witch hunted for being communists. There really were communists in the United States. It's not like they didn't exist. It's not like it was just this absurd proposition. But these people were trying to make sure that they were associated with every different civil rights cause. So there were people who were members of the Communist Party, and they were low-key members of the Communist Party. You didn't really know that they were. And because communists are pretty good about, being secretive about the fact that they're a communist. And then they were trying to get in power in terms of, and they did this with women's organizations. They did this with Black organizations, African American organizations, and they did this with the gay community as well. So anything that had to do with civil rights, there were communists trying to,
But what's the end game?
I don't really know. But here's the other thing.
I appreciate your humility.
Here's the thing. I don't think that any of the people really know, because ultimately it never works. It always fails. There always ends up being a gigantic amount of people believing that they're going to do something and they're going to make the world fair. And there's various leaders, and there's people who are like, yeah, we're all going to do it. We're all going to do it. We're all going to do it. And then it always falls apart. And then somebody exploits their movement. And, there's somebody, people say, you know, once somebody does all the grunt work, then Fidel Castro takes power or Stalin takes power or whatever, and then it's this different thing. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's a massive web of people that, and like, you know, I'm not saying Obama is a communist. I don't really know. But what I do know is that even me, myself, I was seduced by a lot of the rhetoric. I believed in a lot of the cultural, social Marxist stuff. I believed the lie of affirmative action. You know, when people said, well, we're not saying that we're going to penalize qualified people. What we're saying is that in the case of an absolute tie, we're going to give it to the person that's a minority. And it's like, oh, okay. But then all you have to do is examine that for about 5 minutes, and it's like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Because first of all, when is there ever an absolute tie in an applicant to anything? Like, how often is that? I don't think that that actually happens a significant amount. Like, the people have the exact same fucking SAT scores, the exact same GPA, the exact same extracurricular activities. Like, that's bullshit. That doesn't happen. And then second of all, we know that they're penalizing Asian students now because Asian students are good at getting into college. So
the thing is that, I mean, okay, psychologizing about it. Like, I see the appeal for young people,
yeah,
in these kinds of movements. It's that you get to ignore the most dreadful truth of life, which is 90% of it is boring, and about probably 80 to 70% of it is just hard work. That's the only way to get ahead. It's just hard, iterative, boring work over and over and over.
Also,
and over again.
selfish work, like
what do you mean?
work that you're doing ultimately to benefit yourself. And like you know, like the young idealist wants to
yourself or your family. I mean, that's
both.
the thing.
Okay.
I mean, if you can cut your balls off nowadays, we can cut off our balls and take pills, so we don't have to worry about other people. You know, we can.
Yeah. Sure, but I mean, the young idealist Marxist type person who, you know, even though I never considered myself a full-blown Marxist, I always considered myself like a social capitalist or some crap like that. Still, even I was still seduced by much of the Marxist rhetoric for a very long time without examining it. That person believes that they are going to find a job working to help other people. Like they're going to find some job where they're feeding starving African children or something. And they really believe that. And ultimately, there's very few jobs that are like that. Most jobs that you're going to get that are going to pay are, you know, you're not going to sleep well at night knowing that you saved a life. And if you did, it's, you know, just because you're a nurse at a hospital and you gave somebody the medications on time or something, you know.
Or your blood.
Or your blood, or, yeah. Maybe. So, you know, these people want to believe that there's going to be this like awesome purpose where if they work hard enough, that's, you know, everything's going to be super fulfilling, and it's not, life isn't really that fulfilling most of the time. And if it is, like, if you do find a position that's like that, it's 10 times as much work. Like, it's a really hard thing to do.
Well, it's not going to be satisfying in the way that complaining out loud with a poster is satisfying. Like, actually doing the hard work of changing the world it's not standing up there with a bullhorn screaming "fuck you," you know, like, please go home. That's not it. It's long, hard, like, making relationships, understanding that you're a flawed human, that everything is flawed, and like, there's maybe, if you're lucky, there's maybe like 1 micron that you can push it forward, you know, but that's going to take all of your effort to do. And so I think it's really seductive to go along with all these, just to go along with the movement. I don't know. Maybe there's a substance to it. Maybe there's a substance that the world is just, that all of Western civilization is built on, like, the bones that we like gnawed upon in Africa and turned it into our citadels. I don't know. Maybe that's true. But if that's still true, like, after you're done like proclaiming that message to the world, you just have to go back and like figure out how to get along with everybody and like make a society that lives in harmony, right? I mean, it's not sexy. It's just like we're gonna get along, you know, and we're not gonna complain too loud about things. Like when there's a problem, we'll complain about the problem. But like I think part of the reason, I think you brought up this earlier about the internet, it's just like, oh
Yeah.
wow, why focus on my dull existence if I can look at this thing and figure out things to complain about, right? So I
Yeah.
wonder how much of it is really just inflated by our devices that we haven't figured out how much they control us yet.
Well, we didn't,
Do you
you know,
think?
what we didn't bring up is those paragraphs that I wrote to you in DMs, that I sent to you
Yeah.
about my theory about why did tribalism and, you know, obsession over gender politics and race politics, why did that come back so hard
Yeah.
over the past 5 years, especially? And okay, I do think that there's an element of the fact that this just sort of happens every 20 years. Like every generation, that there's the cultural zeitgeist of young people is like, hey, we've never talked about identity politics. Let's do it all day, every day, you know, and that just sort of happens. And then everybody gets really, really sick of it. And it's totally not cool at all to talk about identity politics for the next fucking 15 years.
Yeah.
and then people start, because you know, we're both old enough to remember that from the 90s. Like it was like that then. I mean, fucking, we all remember Rodney King and OJ Simpson, like fucking hell. Like, but
Yeah.
The other thing, the other
Well,
layer.
the thing is that it's not just the thing is like the story isn't that the young people are acting this way. It's that there's people in the administration, there's people in these huge corporations that are actually starting to control like
well, and they were doing it in the 90s. Like it's not like they weren't aware that they were race baiting. Like they knew that they were doing that, you know? And so but you know, the things that they did in the 90s were slightly different than they are today. Like in the 90s, there was a little bit more of an emphasis on environmentalism, which it still is around, but isn't so much of a big deal as it used to be. That in the 90s, you thought about people who were, you know, radical leftists, and you called them tree huggers. You called them like PC granola tree huggers or something.
Yeah.
And now they're SJWs, and SJWs care basically only about identity politics. That's like the only thing they fucking care about. And that what I think is interesting is that Obama did definitely legalize the usage of propaganda on the American people in 2012. And it's kind of a funny story. When that happened, I think it was a writer on some other bill, and it was this like quietly, like not many people knew about it, because Obama was a really shady president. Like he was a very, very shady president. He did, and I don't mean that. I voted for Obama twice, but he was very, very good at being secretive about doing things. And so
kind of like President Trump.
Yeah, a bit in a very different way. Trump distracts with theatrics. Obama distracts with, well, theatrics, but he's a different character, a very different character. Obama was a good guy. Trump is a villain. But Trump has always known he was a villain. He's always known that theatrically he's a villain. I mean, he ran The Apprentice like he was like the head, you know, like he was Satan, and he was like, you had to like come and talk to the Lord of the Underworld before you got kicked off.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a theater guy, and but so is Obama. I mean, Obama is such obviously an actor. But so Obama legalized the usage of propaganda on the American people. And granted, it's not like just because it wasn't legal doesn't mean that they weren't fucking doing it. You know, not like they were. But what I think the change was that they started using. I think that they. This is just my theory, but I think it became permissible to use administration at universities to peddle propaganda in a way that hadn't existed prior to 2012. And that's just my theory, because there's always going to be stuff on the internet, but like all of a sudden around 2012, 2013, there was this synergistic, like simultaneously there was Black Lives Matter, like Trayvon Martin was constantly being talked about in the news. There was all these new blogs. The blog Everyday Feminism started in 2012, and it became very quickly the fastest, widest circulating feminist blog.
Well, because it was so annoying, though.
Yeah.
It's not George Soros. If you could just annoy enough people, then you're going to stir up a lot of shit.
Well, no, but there was definitely weird shit going on with that, because they never had any ads on them. Like there was no ads at all on Everyday Feminism, and it was a very well designed page, and it got and also we know that you could pay Facebook to prioritize your type of article, which is why if you're on Facebook, you'll always see MTV's Decoded with Francesca Ramsey. Like somehow that always shows up, even though it's actually not that popular. And because you can pay Facebook to prioritize things in the algorithm, and so all this social justice stuff was showing up. And so despite the fact that Everyday Feminism had no actual money-making capacity, it was this incredibly widely circulated blog. And it's not George Soros. He's the biggest single donor, but there's an actual head of the way all this stuff works. There's a company called Media Matters, and it's headed by a guy named David Brock. And David Brock is his actual appearance is somewhat of a mystery from what I can tell, because I've looked at all sorts of pictures of him. Here, I'm gonna screen share.
Okay.
You'll have to present me to everybody by clicking on there's a thing in the in my window. There's like a little arrow, and you click on it, and it says present to everyone.
Wait, where are you going? Safari? What?
So wait. I'm gonna screen share. You just need to. You need.
Oh wait, hold on. I think I saw that. Wait, no.
You need to. On my window, there's a teeny little thing in I think it'll be in the upper left corner.
Wait,
in
your
my
window.
in my little thumbnail window.
Oh, every time I talk, it changes. Okay, so I'm gonna not talk. Okay.
Yeah, and click on it when it says it'll say you click on the little thing to make a window come down, and then it says yeah, there we go. Okay. So David Brock is the head of this company called Media Matters, and Media Matters, from what it seems, is in power of the entire so you know how like CNN, the New York Times, and then everything in the blogosphere.
Wait, is that his real hair?
I don't fucking know. But okay, but this guy is this David Brock person. He's the head of Media Matters, and Media Matters, what they do is they specialize in basically creating a gigantic media narrative. So people first became really aware that this was happening during Gamergate. Okay. When the gamers started busting the feminists and figuring out that they were basically kind of committing fraud. Not necessarily fraud, but unethical journalism, and the gamers were starting to make like YouTube videos sort of busting them. And there was this day, I forget the exact date, but all the gamers remember it, where something yeah, no, it's like this. It's just this day in history that they all remember. It was like it's like October 14th, 2014, or some shit. Like they all remember it. It's not funny. It's not funny. No. So it is kind of funny. So what happened on that day was something like 10 different video game publications and blogs. They all came out with articles that had in the title, "Are Gamers Dead?" is the gaming identity over? Is it? And it was basically a hit piece about how gamers are not cool and nobody should be a gamer anymore or something.
Huh.
And it was this weird thing because people were like, wait, it seems like there's an organized smear campaign against us now that we're fighting back against the feminists.
Hmm.
And ultimately, that led people to a lot more heavy investigation. And it turns out that there's this company called Media Matters, and it works directly with basically the entirety of the Western left, it would seem. So it's not just working with CNN and MSNBC and the Democratic Party, but also probably like the Labour Party in the UK and the BBC and stuff like that. And they corroborate stories together. And so David Brock is the head of it. And what's weird about him, and this is why I want to show it, is that apparently we don't really know what he looks like, because if you go through pictures of him, it would appear that there's multiple different ones, because it does not seem that he's the same guy. So that one might be the same guy, this, but that one looks kind of different.
I like that one.
Yeah. It doesn't look like it's a real person also. It just looks like it's...
His hair doesn't look weird, but like there's low resolution on this stream.
Yeah. That one looks like a totally different person. And see, like this, it just does not look like the same person.
Wait, hold on. Prince of Queens, though.
Yeah.
You only showed like one photo of yourself, so maybe you're an aggregate. Maybe you're like a computer program.
Oh,
like
yeah.
just presenting itself as like one entity, like with this like deviant art rendered painting of yourself.
Oh, it doesn't actually look like me. I don't look like that in real life.
I don't know. Maybe yeah, it's pretty thin for somebody who lives in Seattle, drinks a lot of coffee.
So yeah, it's just, there's all these different versions of him, and it's hard to think that they're all like, that's not the same guy. That can't
Okay, is that
be him. And then there's this one. It just does not seem like it's actually the same guy. So there is this weird stuff going on where you can stop presenting me now.
yeah, I
you have
figured
to
that
click
out.
on the thing, and then
Yeah.
There's this kind of like organized what's the word? Conspiracy. I wanted to come up with something else. But
Cabal? Yeah, right? Where are you going to go with that?
Well, okay. So, and I don't necessarily think that what happened was that a bunch of people set out to become communists, like and start like a weird globalist communist utopia or something. Like, that's not what I think happened. What I think actually happened was there were people that started dabbling in global trade, and then there were people that started making a whole bunch of money in global trade. Like George Soros, he does have his Open Borders Foundation, and it is his prerogative to, create a one world government. Like, he is actually into that. But he's not the only. There's no way that he's like the only fucking big force behind it. There has to be other high level donors that are less known than he is. And they started doing that, and they started trying to do that, and things started working out. This was going on through the 90s, and in the 90s it was working out great. And then it started working out not so great. And then, eventually there was the financial collapse of 2007, and things have been sort of kind of shitty ever since then. And I kind of suspect that trying to go more towards socialism was sort of the way to keep the populace in line, because people were starting to get annoyed and starting to see through it, and starting to be like, wait, this globalism stuff, we're kind of getting screwed. Because there's long been people, honest, hardworking America honest, hardworking Americans in the Rust Belt that hate China. You know, like that's been going on for a long time. And so these are people who wish that there was more factories in the United States because they used to have jobs, or their dad used to have jobs, and now they don't have jobs. And the people are just sort of trying to figure out, well, how do we solve those problems? Should we give up on globalism? And they're like, no, we're not going to. So instead, they just keep things the way they are and try to make the citizens happy at the same time. And it turns out that in a failing economy, there's not a whole bunch to go around. And one of the only ways to make people hopeful is to offer things that are somewhat Marxist, and because it sounds good on paper, but then it doesn't work out that well, and people do start to object to it, and then you start to go on weird witch hunts, and identity politics becomes a priority just because that's where you notice people who are suffering the easiest. But ultimately, I think it does have to do with the failing economics and different solutions, and the solution that we had during the Obama administration was social justice, and basically, which I don't think that social justice was communism, but I do think that people gave money to a bunch of people who ended up being communists, and they were slyly communists. The people who you know, like there were high-ranking people, very smart, you know, intelligent people with lots of money and lots of power, said, how do we ensure that our system keeps going? Like, how do we ensure that we stay in power and our friends stay in power? How do we do that? How do we win votes? How do we make sure the Democratic Party stays in power? And they said, well, identity politics gets votes. Identity politics gets votes. So focus on social justice. Put all your money in that, because nobody wants to be a racist. Nobody wants to screw over the little guy. We're going to create this whole elaborate, you know, we're going to socially engineer all of America to be obsessed with not being bigots, and we're going to do that. And then it turned out that all the people who worked in that industry were also communists. And I don't think that the people who gave them money really thought about that.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Almost too much sense.
Oh, I feel that makes me feel very nice.
On that note, I have an early day tomorrow.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on. Oh, wait, you should be thanking me.
Yeah. Thank you for. I just remembered.
Well, when your band gets lifted, you know, I woke up. I woke up the other morning. I was thinking about the word retard. Because of your video, you did a video about the word retarded.
Oh, you were talking about that with Karen. You were talking about, you actually used that as the example of the word that it became a slippery slope.
Well, no, no.
I'm not saying that you referenced me when you were talking to Karen Saron. I'm just saying you.
But after I referenced it, then yeah, it came back. But I was thinking about that, and just like the culture of like, because before the PC culture in the 90s, there was this like late 80s culture of offensiveness, like with Ice-T, you know, and like all these like bands.
Oh, and like Andrew Dice Clay, maybe.
Yeah, you know, and I think there's like this pendulum between the culture of offensiveness, which is kind of masculine, and then this culture of offendedness, right? Which is kind of feminine. And I'm using those as archetypal terms, not as like individual things. But I was thinking about like how like basically what you have is like a 12-year-old boy who just can't help from like just going around saying fuck you, you know, like just saying the worst thing, right? And then you have this 12-year-old girl that just can't suppress every social situation. She's just got to correct everybody, you know. And like those are the two people that we do not want in charge. Yeah. And the only way to like get them to like stay out of like being in charge of everybody. Just like let them like battle it out, but like over here. You guys just do that thing over here, but you're not going to be in charge of the whole discussion. But they always love to be the center of attention. So I was just thinking about like your situation with not being able to like live stream right now. You know, because you said the word retarded, and like like
I
everybody
didn't
should
just
say
say
that.
the word retarded. I argued about why people should be able to use the word retarded. That was the point of the video. And that's
Yeah.
what's really sad about why I was censored for that. But oh well.
It's a temporary band, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can still upload videos. I just can't actually live stream on my channel for
Yeah.
about 2.5 more months.
Oh, geez, that's so long in your time.
Yeah. Though I haven't been
Yeah.
live streaming a bunch anyway. I quit
Okay.
drinking, so that
Is that like a necessary ingredient
it
to these
helped.
streams? Okay, yeah.
I was known for being someone who would do these like, not uncommonly like 4.5, 5, 6 hour streams and just like have multiple different people on throughout the whole night. And
Oh, jeez.
yeah.
Wow. Well, you're in Seattle though,
Yeah.
right? So we should meet up. You do have a physical
Yeah.
container, right? You're a corporal
Yeah. I'm a real
entity.
person. I hang out. You can ask Sister Danger. She has a YouTube channel. We hang out in person sometimes, and I've hung out with Jeff Holiday and his wife before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we should meet up. Have
Yes,
a
absolutely.
Seattle coffee. Or if you ever come through Olympia, let me know. I don't live technically in Olympia. I'm just really, really close by.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks everybody for watching, and thanks, Benjamin, once again for having me on.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We're going to close this down now, and then I'm going to chat with Prince of Queens real quick. So, night.